Live. There it is. All right. Let's rock and roll, shall we? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in, regardless of the platform that you're on, whether you be joining us over on the YouTube channel or over on TikTok. We are simultaneously streaming, and whoops, I forgot to put my video capture device on. Stand by. I didn't realize I was not on camera. There we go. All right, we are on camera, ready to rock and roll. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're back with a special live stream, live update. It is June 18th, 2024. We're here in the Weather Center. We're going to be talking PTC/Future Tropical Storm Alberto. So I'll start off by saying I praise the Lord. We were right on the money with this. If you guys have been tuning in for a little over a week now, we had been mentioning that not only was between June 10th and June 21st going to be our prime time frame for us to finally get our first name storm. A little towards the back end, we were almost there. We'd said primarily June 16th to about the 18th, and well, you know what? We're getting there. We're right there. So you know what? I'll take that as a little bit of a win. We have brewing Tropical Storm Alberto. Not too sure why we have not designated it just yet, I guess because of the overall characteristics of this cyclone out there. We still have it identified as a PTC. Not a big fan of that. Really doesn't make a difference to me in my opinion. I mean, just classify, go ahead and give it a name. It's got the structure, it's got the isms about it, it's got the look, it's got the winds, the central pressure. And what's ironic is if you look, it is nearly stationary according to our current intermediate advisory at 7 o'clock Central Time, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have 35 knots, 40-mile-an-hour sustained winds in the center of circulation, 999 millibars center of pressure, and it's nearly stationary out there over the northern Bay of Campeche, and it is still progged to drift off towards the west-northwest, if not the northwest. So right now, we can say with a fair bit of confidence it is likely to not directly impact the southern half of Texas. It is more or less going to wash ashore into northeastern Mexico, and then wash out almost entirely, rain itself out as it gets G's graded from the bottom up, as we like to describe it here on the channel, against the higher terrain features just over inland Mexico there. Still looking at a tremendous amount of rainfall for southern Texas, the Rio Grande Valley. I know I have a few lovely viewers out there tuning in from that general area, watching for the rainfall totals, and we are definitely going to touch on that first and foremost before we get even further into the briefing. So, folks, thank you very much for tuning in on TikTok. Jacob Waddell, I see you popping in on the TikTok as well. Good to see you, buddy. Let's go ahead and say good morning to a few folks that we have joining us on YouTube. It looks like the chat is rather robust already. First and foremost, I'm going to give a stellar shout out, a special shout out, we'll say, to One Nation Weather, buddy. I know you have your own YouTube channel that you're working on, producing content on a day-to-day, if not every other day basis, and I've been seeing a lot of your posts, a lot of your late notifications. I'm not too sure why YouTube has been notifying me so late. I saw your written post yesterday that was written 2 days ago. And I just want to extend a sincere level of gratitude to you, man. It means a tremendous amount from YouTuber content creator to YouTube content creator that you're always hopping in the lives, always listening in and showing that wonderful support, definitely. And the reason I make it a little more unique is because I know that you are a weather content creator yourself. So we're both sitting in the same pedestal, sitting in that same chair at the end of the day, trying to help warn viewers, get the good information out. So I just want to sincerely say thank you to you. And of course, I cannot forget all of my lovely, faithful viewers from across the spectrum. We got Richard Perez, Zenful in the chat. Who else do we got? We got Nomad Avenue 6, Tommy Andropoulos. Forgive me if I mispronounced that name. Who else do we have? I saw some other names popping up. We have, let's see. I saw some other names. We have, wow, okay, I got to scroll down. Brian, Florida, USA, good to see you. Welcome in from beautiful New Smyrna Beach. Thank you for joining us. James Keene, thank you for tuning in. April Claremont, thank you so much for joining in. TG Herman, good to see you, buddy. Kevin Rivera. Who else? Kyle Talcott, Twilight Firefly 100, welcome in. Super Charas, thank you so much for joining us. All right, guys, let's get started. Mary B, thank you very much for dropping us a follow over on TikTok. Let's get into this, shall we? So here it is. For the first time in 2024, we have our first Hurricane Center forecast cone. Forecast track. The Stardashians, Misadventures, thank you so much for tuning in. Hello there. So as you can see, we are still slated to see this thing work its way off very slowly to the north before, again, big shout out to Mick and Marley out there. If you're going to be tuning in, I hope to see you in the chat. Before we see Janice Van Steenberg, good morning. I almost missed you in the chat. Thank you very much for tuning us. The Miami Mommy, thank you so much for tuning in. We are going to be drifting off towards the north and northwest very slowly until that upper ridge, that 600 decameter ridge, can really fully establish itself over the eastern half of the United States. And as you can see, it almost is a no-brainer that thing's going to get nudged immediately off towards the west as that anticyclonic flow around our mid to upper level high height center, or the ridge over the eastern United States, can really begin to build in, increasing our trade winds out of the east, pushing this towards the west right into Mexico. National Hurricane Center, if I'm not mistaken, did bump up their forecasted intensity just a little bit. We're sitting steady at 40 miles an hour if you look at the latest observation down below. And if I'm not mistaken, I want to say it goes 45 to 50 as we roll into tomorrow. 50 miles an hour, and then as soon as it makes landfall, we're back down to a 30-mile-an-hour tropical depression, and then bam, just kind of disappears. Very quick little season opener. We're going to get our first name storm, check the box, keep moving, and we can officially say we have one of, 21 or 23 names? One of 21, 23 names off the list. I forget exactly. I don't really pay too heavy attention. I just want to rather look at the storms and go storm by storm. But, Tropical Storm Alberto is definitely on his way, and in this case, it's not going to be a situation like PTC 22 last year where it formed up and then disappeared before it could do anything. It is definitely continuing to organize. This, I know, is going to be the big kicker that everyone wants to look at. So what we're looking at here is going to be the rainfall forecast, the potential rainfall totals, kind of like the QPF we would see on WPC for Texas, even trying to get a little bit of that moisture up there towards southwest Louisiana. For my TikTok viewers out there, I had mentioned this yesterday that some of this wraparound flow could try to nudge its way onto the coastline near the Lake Charles area. Houston, Texas could see a little bit of elevation in their rains just because this is such an expansive storm, and I'll show you on Windy exactly why I'm really so against all this hurricane stuff that's floating around. Not singling anybody out because I've seen other sources, I've seen multiple people out there on the social medias talking about hurricane intensification. This is a different type of storm, folks. It's not going to do that. It's not going to pull an Otis. I know somebody on one of my comments yesterday had mentioned, I know it was joking, but they had said, not expected to develop, and the next thing you know, Otis. First and foremost, let's not crack jokes too soon, Junior, as they would say in Fast and the Furious, but, and again, not from a malicious point at all whatsoever. But this is just a different type of storm. It's going to remain very broad, very elongated. It won't have the general dynamics or the traditional physics of a very consolidated, smaller, mesoscale tropical storm that is rapidly turning into a hurricane. A lot of it just simply boils down to the dynamics or the physical mechanisms of how fast it's spinning. That's what creates that central low pressure and also helps to build our storm surge bubble as it gets closer to the coastline. And that's just not going to be the case here. It's going to remain fairly moderate, fairly minimal. We'll get a named storm more than likely out of it, but that's about it. So right now, as you can see, just as we had mentioned with that potential Bahamas system, which we will touch on just a little bit, primarily a north side loaded system. We're going to have very gratuitous onshore flow out there. We're loading up the rainfall totals right along the southeast and southern half of Texas. Looks like Corpus Christi is like a new insider on this channel. Could see anywhere between 6 to 8 inches. We'll get into the National Weather Service totals here in a moment. As you go further out, you can see just to the south of San Antonio, just to the immediate south of Houston, anywhere south of San Antonio, west to east of San Antonio to the Texas border on either side, to the Gulf Coast to the east, Mexico border to the west, south of the latitude line of San Antonio, you're going to be seeing anywhere between 3 to 6 inches of rainfall. And then further to the north, it just continues to go down further and further and further, looking at 2 to 4, 1 to 2 inches, and so on. Midland, Texas, out there towards West Texas, where the dry line typically establishes itself, could see between 1 to 2 inches. And then it goes without saying, much of Mexico is going to be inundated by the 3 to 6 inch mark. Higher terrain, you can see the mountains are highlighted here very well. Mountains there are probably looking at between 8 to 12 inches of rainfall, just because it is the higher terrain feature, which could induce some mudslide conditions. So folks along the lee or even the windward side of those mountains really need to be paying attention to this as it works its way onshore. I wanted to pull this up really quick because if you don't take my word for it, here it comes from the official sources. The key messages for PTC1/Future Alberto. Users are reminded not to focus on the exact forecast track of this system. That's them trying to get away from the line that they used to have on the forecast cone. If you look at the cone here, there is no line. We're not looking primarily at just the center of circulation. We're trying to focus on how wide this system is. So if I were to use this chart here as the label here, kind of like a key, if you will, the center of the storm is going to track somewhere like this, somewhere within the cone, but the influence of it is going to move along if you were to extrapolate it out like this. So it's going to be a fairly broad and expansive storm. I'm sure it's going to mention here. As a matter of fact, look at the key point number 2. Right out of the jumpstart, this rainfall will likely produce considerable flash and urban flooding. With new and renewed river flooding, mudslides are also possible in areas of higher terrain across Centam into northeast Mexico. So pretty much right on the money. We're pretty in line with the National Hurricane Center. We're not trying to up this any more than it needs to be. We're focusing in right on the realistic impacts, the situation at hand. We're looking at a realistic ceiling. This is going to be a mid-grade tropical storm when it comes ashore, and the primary threat here is going to be flooding. However, I will probably mention that the winds embedded within some of these feeder bands could try to get a little sporty, could try to gust up to that 40, 50 mile an hour range, very similar to what you'd see in a severe thunderstorm. And obviously, because this is a tropical system, despite its slow, broad rotation, we cannot rule out the possibility of some waterspout action or a potential funnel or two. Even the Invest 90L dropped a random unwarned tornado for South Florida, so obviously the threat is there. We don't want to discount that at all just because this is a fairly weak system. We'll move on to our satellite image. We're looking at the broad spectrum here. We have a couple of interesting features that we're going to talk very briefly about so we can keep the train rolling. Here is PTC number 1. Future Alberto looking fairly impressive. Not a lot of thunderstorm activity with it. As I mentioned previously, we're actually already seeing some rainfall and some moisture moving in across New Orleans, the Gulf coastline of Louisiana. Even Biloxi, Mississippi, further interior Mississippi, is seeing a little bit of that moisture fetch from it. So that puts it into perspective that this system is really big. The southern periphery is still down there near Guatemala, El Salvador, Belize. The Yucatan is still being smothered by tremendous thunderstorm and heavy rainfall activity. So their totals are definitely ramping up very quickly. And so this is a very large-scale system. It's trying its best to consolidate. We're not quite there yet. Fairly impressive in terms of its symmetry. We're trying to get there, but the thunderstorm quantity really needs to wrap up closest to its center of circulation before this thing can truly begin to deepen down. That's another reason why I'm a little concerned that some of the folks are getting the wrong information in terms of mentioning rapid intensification and explosive development. No, we're right on track. The models have been doing fairly well with this. The timing is good. The intensification is good. So we're doing okay for ourselves. Here's our Bahamas AOI, north of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, still doing its thing out there. Some thunderstorm activity associated with it. Primarily baroclinic in nature. We still have our trough axes moving over top Bermuda, pushing further and further into the North Atlantic. So this is really not anticipated to organize, but I have noticed that overnight models have kind of picked up a little bit more support with it. Not expecting a big system or anything like that. We're not looking at anything organizing, but on the bright side, some of the models have fallen back in love with this pushing towards northern Florida, Georgia, and giving us some much-needed rain, even if it is just an extra inch or two to help to bolster our numbers. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. ITCZ, there's a really massive tropical wave, a very organized tropical wave coming off of Africa. And the main reason I bring this up is we'll talk about it in a moment. Kevin Rivera, shout out to you in Puerto Rico. My tia Elba out there in Puerto Rico, the Lesser Antilles. Again, front lines. There's definitely something I have in my notations here to my left that I want to talk about a little bit. Here's a closer look at the GOES East satellite shot for the Gulf of Mexico. There it is, future tropical storm Alberto. I keep wanting to say tropical storm. I really don't understand why we haven't just classified it yet. We're there. We're pretty much there already. We have good outflow in the upper levels, nice counterclockwise rotation down there at the surface. You can see it wrapping up. There's our system right there. One thing I also don't want folks to fall into the trap. I've been seeing a lot of people also commenting on other videos, other social media posts that, oh, this is a massive system. This is going to be a huge, destructive storm. Remember, this is spawning in from the Central American gyre. Okay, let's zoom back out again. The gyre is all this moisture, all this thunderstorm activity. PTC number 1 is around here. That's PTC number 1 right in through here, a little bundle of vorticity. I know I love to bring it up, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are probably annoyed with me mentioning it, but it has struck an emotional chord with me. If you harken back to about 2, maybe 3 Mondays ago when I was in North Carolina, and there were a bunch of those people in the live stream talking smack about the thumbnail, you're hyping up, there's nothing I mean, first of all, there's a storm, so Sorry, you're wrong. But remember the thumbnail where I said the gyre is spinning and I had an arrow, 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 arrow? That's because we're watching to see all these little clusters of vorticity, which one could possibly manifest itself and be spat out from the gyre as a tropical cyclone. And in this case, PTC number 1 here on the northwest quadrant of it has won the battle, and as those arrows implied, it is going to shoot off towards the west-northwest, the northwest. So, like I said, for my new viewers, sometimes things may look a little sensationalist on the surface. Give me a chance. Let me talk you through the reasoning, and hopefully you'll understand picking up what I'm putting down. Here's a look at the National Weather Service down there for southern Texas, and I noticed on the Weather Channel earlier this morning, I was on my way back from the gym, and I saw the Weather Channel posted an update on their Instagram, and he had gone on to mention that there are tropical storm warnings for the coastline of Texas, but it looked like on their map they had tropical storm watches for Mexico, and I left them a comment. I'm like, pardon me if I'm mistaken, but shouldn't this be the other way around? If the projected path puts it into Mexico, shouldn't we have the watches in effect now for Texas and the warnings in effect for Mexico, or just extend the warnings all the way up? I got to move my camera again. We're getting some sun glint. There we go. But it looks like, looking at National Hurricane Center, if I'm not mistaken, I have it pulled up. Yeah, here we go. We have warnings all across the coastline. Definitely in full agreement with that. Consistency across the board, so that's good. Tropical storm warning in effect for the immediate coastline, Corpus Christi, Rockport, Port Lavaca, and further down towards the south, getting closer to the Brownsville area. I know you're not in the immediate warning criteria, but Brownsville, I would definitely say start looking out for tropical storm conditions. Even if they're not prolonged or sustained tropical storm conditions, we really do not want to look at this as a perfect grid. Remember, with all things weather, weather doesn't act in straight lines. So you're going to have a little bit of bleed over, especially if this system does decide it wants to wobble just a smidge further to the north. We're going to see tropical storm conditions bleed a little bit further inland. It's not going to be a perfect county-to-county border. You know what I mean? If we come over to the flash flood watch, everybody is under a flash flood watch. Total rainfall estimates of 4 to 9 inches, locally higher amounts possible. So I like to advertise this. I love to mention it, whether it be for my guys over there on TikTok, if it's here on YouTube, if it's on Instagram, you name it. I love to mention that even though the key takeaway is an average of X to Y inches, you need to be aware of the satellite and the radar, your current conditions, your situational awareness, because some of these cells, they can bubble up at the last second and produce even heavier rainfall. The other day on Father's Day weekend was up in DeLand, and a small little cell out there on the radar dumped at least 2 inches of rainfall, and it was a tiny cell, much smaller than the county. So it goes without saying, you still need to watch live action real-time data. Coastal hazards, you probably guessed it, dangerous rip currents. You don't want to be out on the water. That's common sense, folks. Don't go fishing. Don't get out on a boat, especially a smaller boat. Just kind of move a little inland. This isn't going to be a catastrophic system, but it definitely warrants staying out of the water. Think of Jaws. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. Here's PTC number 1, and then the rainfall forecast. Here are the totals forecast for much of southern Texas, brought to us by the National Weather Service. You can see on the immediate coastline from Port Lavaca, Rockport, Corpus Christi, now I'm accidentally saying that, Beeville, Alice, and further inland. They're trying to smooth it out a little bit, but again, don't pay too close attention to the border here. Obviously, there's going to be bleed over back and forth, and I also want to give the disclaimer out. Don't be upset if you don't receive the total forecasted inches here. Invest 90L was a phenomenal example of this. Even myself, looking at the rainfall charts, we were predicting that even central and northern Florida were going to get between 2 to 3 inches of rainfall with Invest 90L, and that didn't happen. We barely saw anything here from Polk County all the way up towards the northern Florida border. We barely got anything. So you kind of have to, it's a give and take with these graphics. They're a generalized forecast, but don't take them as the end-all, be-all. You still want to watch your real-time data or rely on us for continuing coverage of the real-time data, because there's going to be some mixing and matching. There's going to be some wobbling all over the place. Again, weather doesn't behave in black and white. You're going to see more, you're going to see less in certain areas. So this is just a general outlook of what you should be prepared for, okay? Here's a look at windy.com. We're looking at the surface level. Unfortunately, our disturbance out there to the north looks more or less like an elongated inverted trough. No close center of circulation, so I guess it did wash out, unfortunately. Or I should say just washed out. I shouldn't say unfortunately, but it has washed out. We have just a inverted trough axis extending from the Dominican Republic, Haiti, all the way back up towards the western periphery of, or the western latitude line of Bermuda. So a very elongated trough axis. Still looking at something trying to bundle up here. Most of the models are in agreement that we will continue to see that cyclonic curvature wander its way towards Florida, maybe upping our rain chances. And then if you look down there over the Bay of Campeche, the western and southwestern Gulf of Mexico, look at this giant, almost figure 8 looking center of circulation. It almost looks like there's 2 center of circulations down there trying to break off from one another. So this is why I mention we're not going to see a hurricane out of this. If this were a much more tiny localized center, I would definitely be a little bit more concerned about that upward vertical motion, that latent heat exchange of the general dynamics you see that produces the energy and intensification from these tropical systems. But the fact that it is so elongated, think of it from just your basic science physics class. Right now, this system is spinning in its chair with its arms outstretched. And obviously, we all know the old metaphor, as you bring the hands in, you spin faster. If we can get that center to shrink down, then we'll start to see it strengthen up. But as long as it remains elongated like that, yeah, we'll get some tropical storm impacts out of it, but it's not going to go up from there. You never really see a hurricane with a 200-mile wide, if not, that could almost be 400-mile wide center of circulation and eye. It's just not possible. It's not the way these systems work. Actually, before we move on, I'll show you the general steering flow here. We'll go up to 850 millibars. And you could see, even at 900 millibars, it does a fantastic job. So there's our large ridge beginning to build in over the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast. This is what tried to produce some severe weather. Look at all this low-level jet activity moving across the Great Plains. Unfortunately, I saw a couple of posts out there on the X that we really didn't get a whole lot of severe weather out of it. Some wind reports, some damaging wind reports, severe thunderstorm warnings, but not a whole lot of tornadic or hail activity, which is good news. And this is going to be the general consensus here, and I'm glad that models are shaping up. I don't know where, I mean, even if this thing doesn't develop out here, I was very confused as to why all of our models were suddenly dragging this up towards the north. Just did not make any sense to me, and it looks like our models have snapped back into reality, and they're all forecasting this area of thunderstorms to just transition off towards the west, kind of ported towards the Daytona Beach, Palm Bay, Jacksonville area, maybe trying to move into the southern periphery of Georgia. This is going to continue to move off towards the west-northwest, and you know, I will entertain that if this high height center, this high pressure over the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, if this does wobble just a smidge, only takes a subtle nudge, we're using that term a lot in this live stream, if it wanders off towards the east just a bit in terms of its current position, this could allow PTC Tropical Storm Alberto to move a little bit closer towards southern Texas. So again, real time. We have our models, we have our satellite, but we definitely want to pay attention to our real time data and compare it to the models as opposed to going from the models to real time. We're at that point where we can start to finally verify and initialize our models because we have our live systems out there on the table. Brian Rowe, what's preventing the system from rapidly strengthening? Well, first and foremost, it's not in the most favorable environment. We're really not in the best shape here. First and foremost, it came out as a very elongated system. So we already have that going against it, and we're only going to be over water for about 48 hours. So it's not going to have very much time to break off from the overall gyre and consolidate into a very fast spinning cyclone. It's just not going to have the ability to do that. Second of all, we're surrounded by land. We're surrounded by land all around its different quadrants or its compass rose, if you will. The only area that's kind of out there in open water is going to be its northeast and northern portions. But the feeder bands are going to be running up against the terrain areas of Mexico, all over the terrain areas of the Yucatan and southern Mexico, northern Central America. So it's not in an opportune area. If this was out here, then yeah, maybe we would have a shot at, more so intensification as opposed to in here. We're kind of bottled up, and it's such an expansive system, it's not going to be given the opportunity to really deepen. Here's a current look at all the data that we have for PTC number 1. You can see here the latest ensembles from the GFS. general thinking is going to be as it wanders towards the north, it'll eventually get pushed towards the due west direction once that high height center can really establish itself. Some of the ensembles trying to track it more a little bit further to the north, so again, we're going to have to watch that real time, and so on and so forth. Intensity guidance has actually come down, so I noticed a lot of folks were getting a little panicked. A lot of folks were freaking out yesterday because some of the ensembles, actually, matter of fact, I'm pretty sure we can look back at older runs. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. So when this system first dropped, first and foremost, you guys got to realize that some of these models out here, the ship, what is this? The DSEM and all that stuff. These upper end models, they're not entirely NNIB. They're not the most reliable intensity models for starters. Okay. And if you look, anybody with a realistic sense of meteorology would say that the general average here is right in here. Looking at a mid-grade tropical storm, don't pay attention to these. These are the outliers pushing it towards Category 1. Not a hurricane, guys. And if you notice, it's not going to have very much time to strengthen. We have about 24 to 36 hours over open water before all of the models, even the bullish ones trying to make this thing into a hurricane, are just going to crash and burn. So, yeah, that's neither here nor there. If I close this out and we look at... Oh, whoops, I closed the page out. Let me go back to that. I'm sorry. Let me go back to current storms, pull this back over here, and if we look at our current ensembles for 12 Zulu, see how even the ship and the more bullish models have come down. Now we're really right in line with the general average between a 40 to 50 knot tropical storm, right around the 45 knot, 50 knot tropical storm threshold. Not looking at anything that's going to suddenly shock us like Hurricane Otis last year. That is not on the table here. Very different characteristics across all levels of the atmosphere. So yeah, low to mid-grade tropical storm at best. Here's our 0Z European model, and we're going to look at a couple things, okay? So there goes future Tropical Storm Alberto. The European model is kind of in line with its center of pressure. We're a little bit over forecast, or I should say under forecast. Sorry. In terms of its depth, European model is thinking we'll hit that 999, 980 millibar threshold as we go into the morning tomorrow before it finally moves ashore and becomes nothing else more than a remnant low. If you look out there over Florida, though, once again, like I said, the models are kind of coming back to a little bit of an inverted trough, some cyclonic turning in the winds coming on the east coast of Florida and southeastern Georgia. So good news there. I'm actually excited for that. Hopefully it holds true. We can get some much-needed rainfall. You can see the entire state of Florida is bundled up in rain. And then, again, we were talking about this yesterday. And National Hurricane Center is picking up what we've been putting down. Some of the folks on X, when I shared the 12Z model run from yesterday, said phantom storm, and it's like I didn't know the European model was accused of fantasy storms, but okay. But there's that second low pressure right there. Not nearly as impressive of a signal as yesterday. If we go back to 12Z yesterday and take a look at that storm, far more impressive right there, coming up towards the coastline of Louisiana and actually looking very tropical. So you see the difference here, guys? This is what I was talking about. I'll switch the AOI so we can take a closer look. This is why I don't anticipate any rapid intensification from this system here. So look at how broad and elongated this is. It's very stretched out, very huge pressure gradient, but not a steep pressure gradient. We're at 1,000 millibars here, and we only go up to about 1,010, 1,012. So about maybe a 8 to 10, maybe 12 millibar difference, if that. Actually, no, even less than that. This is your 1,012 millibar isobar here, so maybe about an 8 millibar difference between there to there. Not a very rapidly rotating storm, not a strengthening storm, not a very vertically stacked storm. If we fast forward to that next one, look at this. Vast difference. This here tells me this could be strengthening if, hypothetically, this were on the table. Very big difference here. There's your 1,012 millibar line, 996. Much steeper gradient right there. So this tells me this thing is spinning faster. It is far more consolidated, and this could be intensifying as it comes up towards Louisiana. But big disclaimer, don't take this as reality. Obviously, this is going to change. Looking at 0Z now, huge change already. Looking at just another very, very broad donut coming up out of the Yucatan and then moving down towards southern Texas and eastern Mexico. We'll definitely have to watch that either way, because if it does get out over the Gulf of Mexico like that previous iteration did, could be a strengthening low pressure. If it does crash into Mexico once again, that's just going to re-intensify our, re-intensify our flood risk. So either way, not a good sign. Not a good sign. Definitely not a good sign. So here's a look at the 06Z European model. Still right in line with what we're anticipating. Looks like a landfall of a slightly intensified low-pressure system. Tropical storm moving in towards the east coast of Mexico. 998 center of pressure as it makes landfall sometime late Wednesday night into early Thursday morning. So not going to have a whole lot of time over open water. There goes our little, we'll call it our perturbation in the pattern there, bringing some rainfall towards the east and northeast coast of Florida. And then even on the 6 Zulu, if you go out to the full 90-hour mark, there goes our next low right there. So the European model is definitely in line with that situation beginning to set itself up for another potential gyre system down there over the Yucatan. So regardless, this is going to be a very, very catastrophic rainmaker for Central America, for Mexico, even for Texas. If this thing does develop and move generally off towards the west and northwest, even if this is a big instance of if it doesn't develop, we're still going to see very, very intense conditions with it, and that being just an extended period of rainfall to help supplement what's already going to fall from PTC1/future Tropical Storm Alberto. So honestly, this is worst case scenario. If we get a second system, I almost want whatever comes out of the Yucatan to head off towards the north, because we need the rain here in the southeast far more than Mexico, Central America, and Texas. So if it comes up and out and continues to trend towards the west-northwest, that's not a good sign. I'm not going to do the thumbnail with not good. I'm not going to do that, but it's just not a good sign. We actually want to kind of spiritually tell this system to move up towards the north and east to get it away from folks who are already probably battling the flood conditions. I wouldn't necessarily say the Euro has been producing fantasy storms. I definitely wouldn't say that. In fact, the European model in comparison to the GFS model, they're two very different computer models in the way that they're designed, and the scientist input calculations and physics-driven equations and the physics-driven equations that they put into the models, night and day difference. So I definitely wouldn't say that the European model has been producing fantasy storms. Fantasy storms would definitely be far more an instance of when you see the small little bubble of rainfall in the GFS, and next thing you know, it's a Category 5 hurricane. That's more of a fantasy storm. The European model has always struggled with genesis. Once there's something on the table, then it seems to dial itself in a lot better. But being a non-hydrostatic model, which means a number of different parameters in the atmosphere are not automatically biased to equilibrium, it doesn't typically generate phantom storms. There's a big difference between phantom and just misinterpretation of, I guess, intensity. Which one was the fantasy storm? It really didn't produce a fantasy storm. In fact, I think I know which one you're talking about. I think you're talking about that random run where the European wanted Tammy to become a Category 5. Thankfully, that didn't unfold, but that technically wasn't a fantasy storm because it ended up manifesting itself. We got a hurricane. I remember making a video on that. Kyle Talcott, I'll tell you right out of the bat, you're going to get a lot of hate and a lot of chatter thrown in your direction. You're probably making all the viewers sharpen their pitchforks and get ready to terrorize you, because rainfall is most definitely dangerous. Rain by itself, obviously, if you really want to get into the weeds with it, rain by itself, if it's just a little daytime shower, obviously that's not dangerous. But you know exactly what we're talking about here. This level of rainfall from a tropical cyclone, Mark Suddeth has also said it over on Hurricane Track, and I fully agree with him. Rainfall is an impact. You're not typically going to see 3, 6, 9, 12 inches of rainfall, sometimes more than that, with your garden variety summertime thunderstorms. You're not going to. So rainfall with a tropical system, regardless of if it's a depression or a Category 5 hurricane, is going to be an impact with that storm. So yeah, it's definitely an impact. It's definitely treacherous. This I wanted to pull up. This is going to be our GEFS control model of the precipitable water. And I like to pull this up just to get an idea of, what's coming. So if you look, extreme amounts of rainfall for Texas, even parts of Louisiana, and especially Mexico. Some of the precipitable water amounts are upwards of 3 to 3.5 inches right there along the south and eastern coastline of Texas. So we'll definitely have to watch this. Rainfall is going to be the most extensive threat here. Rainfall is really what's going to up our urban and industrial flooding, like we read on the key messages from National Hurricane Center. And then if you look, even the control member of the GEFS actually does have a very small, compact system trying to spin up and produce some rainfall, maybe a little bit of wind action for northern Florida. So again, like I told you guys yesterday, we're not out of the woods yet with this guy. I really don't think we're going to get anything out of it. Not a classified tropical depression or even Beryl. Definitely not. The confidence is just far too low. Models across the spectrum are looking at an open wave, just some rainfall. But it is worth noting that some rain coming for northern Florida, which is a good sign. GEFS actually does bring a wave. If you notice, there's a wave that comes through the pattern down here, moves right up into the gyre, and the GFS wants to pull that system up and develop it right there. Could possibly be our second system in line with what the European model and the European ensembles were predicting yesterday for the 26th to the 27th, and kind of a spin up that does actually go towards Louisiana. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on it. I think for that secondary low system, I truly believe anyone from the panhandle of Florida down towards the same general area of Texas that we've been talking about right now needs to keep their eyes open for that second system. We'll have to wait and see. We're still very far out in time, 200 hours plus from anything coming from that. But ensembles have been very, very back and forth in terms of the timing with the ridge, timing of a trough, timing of a front. It's going to be the timing game, once again, that's going to determine what happens, if anything happens, with that second system. Talk about Florida weathers. Tommy, I would talk about Florida weather, but not too much to talk about. Not too much to talk about with Florida weather. One area that I want us to also pay attention to, and we're getting towards the back end of the live stream, is this. And I'll show you that in a second. I just want to put that on your radar. Let's go over to our European ensembles before we move over to more long-range discussion. If we look at our tropical depression probabilities out there for the Atlantic, we're maxed out. 100% chance we're going to get something out of that. You can see that the tropical depression favorability has maxed itself out according to the Euro at 0Z. Still some very small indications of tropical depression organization as that thing moves towards the coastline of Florida. And then at 144 hours out, about 5 days out, next Monday, as we come on in and we get ready to talk tropics, we're now up to about an 80% chance of tropical depression formation once again in that same general area. So probabilities are definitely going up. They're incrementally going up, which is what we want to see to build confidence in our forecast. And then I also just want to make mention of this. So if you guys look, not only are there probabilities popping off the southeast, more probabilities down there in Central America, but we're still seeing subtle signals that these waves that are coming off of Africa could try to become just a hair more aggressive. And I'll show you here on the ensembles, the cyclone locations. If you look at 0Z, there goes our first bundle, there goes our second bundle. If you look out over the greater MDR, we're starting to see more and more ensembles that things are going to be punching through the Lesser Antilles, that waves are going to be coming across, and the European model is very subtly highlighting these things. We got a couple of ensemble members pointed towards the southeast once again, a couple of ensembles out there over the Lesser Antilles making a run for the Caribbean, so we'll definitely need to pay attention to that. If we come over to the European AI model, the reason I pulled this up for our long-range outlook as we get ready to wrap up this live stream is if you look out there over the MDR primarily, rain chances are really going to start going up for not only our guys out there in Puerto Rico, the U.S. British Virgin Islands, Hispaniola, Jamaica, but also, and more especially, the Lesser Antilles. So if you look, some very, very robust wave action coming through. There's some down here. There's one here. There's one here that we might just have to watch for. This could possibly be what our European ensembles are trying. They're doing their best to explore all options of this possibly being a player out there in the tropical Atlantic. If we come over to Weather Nerds and take a look at the European ensembles on here, we'll get rid of that pressure bias on weathermodels.com. And we look across the Atlantic basin, you'll definitely see that there is just a bit more of a signal when you debias the ensembles. There you go. So not a whole lot here and then down here. We're looking at some of these things trying to move through the greater MDR. A couple of ensembles still pinging on the east coast of Florida, and then a lot of ensemble agreement, great convergence down there over the BOC. It becomes even more apparent if we switch over to that new website I've been using, Easterly Wave. Let me clear the ink, go over to the North Atlantic, and let's go back to 0Z so we can go out further in time. There you go. So this is all I'm saying. You know, obviously the primary focal point is going to be down here and along the Gulf Coast line. We're watching for our rainmaker for Florida. Lord willing, it does come in and dump some much-needed rainfall for the northern half of the peninsula, but we're also, slowly but surely seeing a bit of a trending upwards very, very slowly. Very slowly. Nothing to sound the alarm at. Nothing crazy, but like I always love to emphasize on this channel, breadcrumbs. Just breadcrumbs leading us through the tunnel. If we go all the way back to the beginning here, notice at 18Z we have just maybe 1 or 2 spaghetti plots. Go to 0Z on the 17th, 1 or 2, maybe a couple more spaghetti plots. Go to 6Z, still a couple. You go to 12Z, starting to see just a little bit more. You go to 0Z today, starting to see even more across the MDR. So all I'm saying is just breadcrumbs. Just little light breadcrumbs. We have a lot of attention put on here. We don't need anything sneaking up on us like this thing almost did. This would have only given us 3 to 4 days to get ahead of it if it developed. That doesn't seem to be the case, so we're lucking out in that department, but we also don't want anything sneaking up on the Lesser Antilles, the ABC Islands, the Guianas from the MDR as these waves continue to move off of Africa, and we start to get closer and closer to the Cabo Verde season of hurricane season. And what's also interesting is we're kind of back and forth, and this is how we will conclude the live stream this morning. Mainly just wanted to get the impacts and the threats out there for Tropical Storm or future Tropical Storm Alberto. If we look at the very, very, very long-range ensembles on the GFS, if you notice, you know, there is some potential activity still slated for the Western Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and then the GFS is lopsided. It's very lopsided. It's really not calling for too much activity out there over the MDR, but still a couple of signals. And this is why I personally think that July might be a slow and steady wins the race. We'll just have to maintain our vigilance, keep our head on a swivel, but it just seems like we're going to be in such an unfavorable environment across the equator that we might not see a whole lot of activity outside of just fairly decent waves moving across the Atlantic through the Lesser Antilles, bringing them rain and possible localized flooding. If we come on over to our vorticity anomaly and look over the upper levels, you'll also see it plain as day. If we go through, you can see right now we are in a fairly favorable environment. Then there is a piece of time where the MJO, as it finishes its phasing over the Atlantic, notice here we do have a really good favorable characteristic over the MDR. So, you know, again, very late tail end of the month, we'll have to pay attention. But that doesn't stick around for long before we get a huge area of sinking air over the entirety of the tropical Atlantic. And if you scroll through, that's going to hang out there for a while. Look at that. Until our MJO can finally come back through towards the middle to latter half of July. If you switch over to the EPS, it's not going to go as far out, but more or less the same general takeaway. You see that very, very decent area of upward vertical motion, good favorable anomalies out there for the MDR until we cross into July, and then boom, the entire area as our MJO moves over the maritime continents is just going to suppress us. So MJO phasing is critical during the first couple of months of the hurricane season until we finally just wake up the tropics more or less and can allow these systems to do their own thing. Right now we have that supplementation brought on by our upper level phasing, and we're going to be coming out of the good opportune phase and moving into a large region of unfavorable environment. And that's just because of the phasing of the MJO. They say that typically tropical activity is suppressed when this bad boy is out there over the Western Pacific, over the maritime continents of Australia, Thailand, Asia, etc. And that's exactly what it looks like it's going to be doing. African easterly wave or African standing wave even kind of goes away for a little bit for the most part. If you look at our vorticity anomaly here in the model lab brought to us by weathermodels.com, you can see the same thing. Just a large area of unfavorable environment. Actually, hey, look at this. This updated. So actually, I'm not going to lie. It looks like that phasing shrank a little bit. So we do continue to see favorable characteristics in our MDR as that MJO phases out, all the way up until maybe the turn of the calendars into July 1st. Then we shut down for a little bit. But this is new. That's definitely new. That hasn't been there. I'm not going to lie to you guys. That's definitely brand spanking new. And perhaps I should have looked at that before coming into this live stream so I don't look silly. In fact, it does look like the European Control Ensemble does bring back our African standing wave for a considerable amount of time, especially towards the back end of July. So that's definitely something interesting. We might get a little bit of a break. I would honestly put it out that maybe the first half of July, just like June, could be quiet. But then the second half, just like June, and possibly into Cabo Verde season, because there it is. I know I'm pointing and you can't see, but there it is. It is on the horizon. I'm going to circle that a bunch. Circle it a bunch, because the clock is ticking, and the clock is going fast. It's June 18th already. What the... August 1st is coming, and I believe from August 1st, it's going to be game time. That's when we really need to start paying attention and being very mindful of what happens out there. And seeing these very strong anomalies out there over Africa tells me that Cabo Verde season, those long track systems could try to surprise us a little bit early. As we see the African standing wave really establish itself out there late July, we also see our favorable characteristics over the MDR and even the Caribbean coming back up. And that, I do think, is what the kicker is for late July and August. Late July and August, for everybody watching right now, both on TikTok and on YouTube, if you want to take away anything from this live stream, I think the big conclusion that you want to keep in your back pocket is going to be where we see formation. Not necessarily our long track systems, where I don't really want us to put a whole lot of emphasis on the waves coming off of Africa. I want us to really focus on the Caribbean, just to the immediate east of the Lesser Antilles and right into the Caribbean, because last year was a huge flip-flop. We had our protective blister of El Nino. That's why there was nothing to be had in the Caribbean. Anytime we see these favorable velocity anomalies coming in and we have very good ingredients out there over Africa to produce our robust African easterly waves or our tropical waves, I want us to be very mindful of Africa, okay? I mean, not Africa, of the Caribbean. I'll zoom in on this so I can draw it out for you guys, and we'll go all the way out towards the back end of the loop. I really don't want us to be focusing primarily on the immediate coastline of Africa. I want us to be watching in that area that we spoke about before the hurricane season started, right here. I want us to watch that area, especially through August. That is typically where we tend to see a lot of our storms really quickly become a lot more aggressive and more robust. Every La Nina and most of our neutral patterns have proven that to us. We've read about it here on the channel. You guys have probably seen it through history. For my hurricane season veterans, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So for late July and into August, I think our attention needs to shift from the Gulf of Mexico to the Eastern Caribbean and the Western MDR right there. And then as we go into September, that's when we can open up the AOR a little bit and start watching things as they come off of Africa. That's the key takeaway. And if you look here, even at these velocity anomalies for late July into August, look at that African standing wave and fairly decent environment out there over the Western MDR and the Eastern and Central Caribbean. Those, I think, are going to be our hot spots. Does that mean the Gulf Coast states won't have much warning for big storms? April, it depends on the timing. It depends on the timing. There goes TikTok being dumb. Shush. Shush. I'm still here. Please verify. Thank you very much. So, April, that really depends. You want to take that on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, some of us weather sources out here, including myself, are going to try to give you as early of warning and realistic warning as possible. Maya, thank you for tuning in. A wonderful fan, or not a fan, I should say, a follower from TikTok. We shoot the breeze back and forth both on X and TikTok. Thank you for tuning in today. April, to answer your question, there will be warning. It's going to be extremely variable, though. That's the key. If we have things forming up in like the BOC or in the immediate Gulf of Mexico, you're going to have maybe a day or two at best. If we have things coming in from the Caribbean, you'll get an extension on that, 3 to 5 days, depending on its forward progress. So yeah, guys, I think June, as soon as we get right to the point we're about to turn the calendar, July is going to close up. We're going to get a time to take a bit of a vacation from the hurricane season. If you have travel plans, perhaps that's the time of year to do it. And then mid-July, just looking at what we have in place. Let's see what the CFS says, if the CFS echoes that same sentiment. Let's take a look. The She anomaly, the 7-day averages. This is for June, July, and then there's late July into August. Oh, it doesn't go out that far? I can't even see what the date is. I hate that it's chopped off at the top there. I can't see it. But, yeah, never mind. I can't tell, unfortunately. I can't really read the timestamp. It looked like this is still in July, so that doesn't really help us very much. But all in all, that's about it. Those are our key takeaways. I guess I'll leave you guys with the fact that La Nina is still not doing anything. La Nina is still not doing anything. Our La Nina forecast is busting, although I know a lot of official sources like CPC, the folks over there that generate the guidance for that factor, and even some of the other folks from CSU, NOAA, are predicting that into July. So maybe that's also why our models are predicting that we could see an uptick in MDR and Caribbean activity late July and into August, because a lot of our official sources now are forecasting that from the middle point of July and on is when La Nina is really going to come in. But right now, we are as neutral can be out there for the El Nino regions. Definitely neutral, and we are not moving anywhere. Look at that. It's moving pretty much to the right on this chart. It's been moving to the right since early May. We've been at that neutral point, and we haven't really seen very much fluctuation. I wouldn't even count that. That's just a little bit of a wave in our wind speeds changing out there for some less upwelling than more upwelling, but the general takeaway is we've just been holding that neutral pattern from early May, and now we're into the back end of June. So that's that, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the live stream. Past Chief number 7 on TikTok. What's your opinion on the East Coast from Boston south? My opinion, especially for August and September, is you guys want to have your eyes open. I think, honestly, late July through early September is when the East Coast could see most of their action, and then it's going to be a toss-up. If we have out-to-sea systems or fully westward tracking systems during Cabo Verde portion of the hurricane season, that's when it remains to be seen. But particularly July and August and into early September is when the East Coast wants to watch. So we shall definitely see. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave me a comment down below in the comment section of this live stream. Feel free to reach out to me on my X, my Instagram, or my TikTok. More than happy to get back to you, strike up a private conversation. I've had a few of you reach out on my X, a few of you reach out on my Instagram. It's been a pleasure communicating with you guys and opening up that line of communication. And, you know, I agree. I don't think I'm not sold at all. I'm not confident on a major La Nina anymore. I still think, if anything, we get a weak, mid-grade La Nina at best, just with the way things are shaking up. Our models have backed off. Our climate models, for that matter, have really backed off on a major La Nina. So I don't see a strong La Nina building in anymore unless something decides to shake it up. You know, you never know. It's all a waiting game. We'll have to just kind of wait and see. Right now in the verification department, we have busted in terms of La Nina already being present for June. So, but that's neither here nor there. We're still getting some action out there. Thank you all very much for tuning in for our special edition of the Weather Center Live Tropics Talk, or our tropical update here on the channel. It is 9:52 on June 18th. We will definitely be live again tomorrow morning. We'll definitely be live once again, so please feel free to tune in if you have some time in the morning. And maybe we'll postpone it into the evening time. We'll see, but it'll probably still be first thing in the morning. Only reason I say postpone in the evening is I've been cutting my workouts short at the gym to get back to you guys, so I have enough time to get set up and get everything rolling for the lives. TRG Tornado, thank you so much for joining in on the chat today. I didn't see you earlier. I apologize, buddy. Great stream, Nazario. See you in the next live stream. That is, if I'm awake for it. Yeah, that is true. But I do appreciate the sincere support. It means a lot to me, dude. I genuinely say that. I can genuinely mean that. Kevin, good morning. Friends from coast to coast in the Caribbean, dry, hot, and breezy here in Upper Tampa Bay, as might be expected. Yeah, you know, unfortunately, we've been just very dry. Skibbity, have a question. Is like Mexico safe? Mexico, depending on where you are, is, quote, safe, but not the immediate east and northeast coastline. That is for certain. So thank you all very much for watching. I'm going to get some protein in my system and continue to obsess over the weather, obsess over the tropics, and get ready for my TikTok update later this evening, and prepare for tomorrow morning's live stream. Maybe I'll try to get the thumbnail and everything built and scheduled tonight, so this way it's a little easier tomorrow morning to have everything ready to go. But you guys have been wonderful. You're always a spectacular audience, and I wish you the best on this Tuesday morning. And I hope the rest of your week, if I don't see you, if you can't tune in for any of our upcoming live streams, I wish you the best for the rest of the week, and you roll into a solid weekend. For our folks out there in Texas, Louisiana, Mexico, just keep an eye on the weather, maintain your situational awareness. Don't panic. Don't buy into any of the excitement. If there is excitement out there, this is our first named storm. Don't blow the lid on it this quick. We have a long hurricane season ahead. We will probably have a number of opportunities to talk about rapid intensification, hurricane this, and etc. So let's roll with the punches. Let's roll with the punches and just keep going. All right, guys? We'll see you again soon. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. But until then, this is Weather Center Nazario signing out.